Greetings, listeners, and thank you for joining me once again as we celebrate stories and storytelling in all their forms and the bards and artists who bring them all to life. I am the Tale Collector and your host, Erica Adams. Warning, this story contains imagery that may be disturbing for some audiences. Listener and researcher discretion is advised. One of the perks of working part-time at a local TV station is that it keeps me up to date on new media, like Albert and Otto, for example, a wonderfully dark little video game for all you Playdead fans out there. It was during one of my morning shifts that I heard about a special showing of a new horror movie by Duluth filmmaker Jim Ojala. I immensely enjoyed this exciting and poignant creature feature, after which I got to meet the director himself, a really nice guy with a great skill and passion for the art of horror-based makeup and special effects. I stayed long into the post-show party, to the point where I had less than 4 hours to sleep before work by the time I got home. I really try not to make a habit of such nights, but the experience was well worth the exhaustion I felt later. After all, how often does one get to meet a real-life six-legged frog named Bud? Let us now witness Strange Nature, released September 22nd, 2018, and recommended for viewers 17 and up. Kim Sweet was once on top of the music world as the hottest pop sensation. Now, years later, years older, and years wiser, she wants nothing more than to put that part of her life behind her. She and her 11-year-old son, Brody, moved from LA to the rural outskirts of Duluth, Minnesota to live with her cancer-ridden father, Chuck. But coping with the less-than-clean living conditions of their new home becomes the least of her problems upon arrival. One teen after another goes missing in the woods without a trace. Even more bizarre, frogs with missing or multiple limbs begin cropping up in disturbingly high numbers on the fringes of the local ponds. Kim suspects pesticide pollution is to blame, but she receives little help from neighbors or the press, who believe her claims of an environmental threat are nothing more than a desperate publicity stunt to revive her long-dead music career. Worse yet, what begins as simply dirty and unattractive becomes deadly when the mutations begin to affect humans and other species dangerously high on the food chain, spreading paranoia just as lethal throughout the close-knit community. Faced with freakish and insanely bloodthirsty predators and violently xenophobic locals, Kim is determined to protect her family and what little worth living for she has left, no matter the cost. You remember what they say about truth and fiction, right? Well, here's an epitome of that adage if I ever saw one. In August 1995, frogs with physical deformities of varying severity were discovered in a pond in Henderson, Minnesota. By the following year, similar sightings were being reported from as far away as Canada and in as many as 35 U.S. states. Wildlife researchers and environmental scientists from numerous organizations were called in to investigate, including the University of Minnesota, the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, the National Wildlife Health Center, and the United States Environmental Protection Agency. But despite their best efforts, a conclusive explanation behind the deformities was never found. Funding officially stopped in July 2001, and as of 2020, the ecological mystery remains unsolved. I wasn't familiar with Ojala's name before seeing his feature-length directorial debut, but I quickly learned his prior filmography is nothing to sneeze at. As a makeup artist and/or special effects technician, some well-known movies that he's worked on include Citizen Toxie, The Toxic Avenger 4, House of the Dead 2, Lady in the Water, X-Men: The Last Stand, Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, Where the Wild Things Are, Tron Legacy, and Thor. Needless to say, the subject matter here was right up his alley. Besides his masterful use of hair-raising puppets and delightfully gruesome practical effects, from the aforementioned frogs to two-faced wolves to humans young and old with severe facial deformities, Ojala consulted numerous ecologists investigating the real-life mutation phenomenon in Minnesota, even obtaining live mutant frogs to feature alongside the fake ones. Ojala's sincere effort to make the environmental and biological science as concrete and believable as possible really helps to make the film's plot points, as well as its real-world implications, all the more disturbing. I did have one fear going into this movie that had nothing to do with monsters. I was really afraid Strange Nature would end up being little more than a 90-minute visual tour of landmarks and attractions I've seen and lived with for years, with a scary creature or two sprinkled in. I was beyond thankful for how Ojala instead makes his hometown its own character that helps drive the plot without wrecking the pacing or sacrificing the story. As scenically beautiful and historically rich as the city of Duluth is, my personal experiences as a writer seeking out book publishers in said city have left me frustrated by how little opportunity there is to express stories and artistic ideas unrelated to the location or subject of Duluth simply because it's not economically viable. With these memories in mind, I was particularly intrigued at the way Duluth's heavy reliance on tourism was addressed in a certain scene, which features out-of-town visitors in t-shirts depicting crudely drawn mutant animals with the caption, "Minnesota, land of 10,000 freaks," screaming at the top. It felt at once ironic and somewhat amusing to see the film's residents, after news of the deformities gets out, bemoaning the loss of tourists even as they attract well-paying, albeit more boorish, thrill-seekers by the busload. Interestingly, and incidentally, the idea that I may have just insulted someone in my North Shore audience brings me to our leading lady. To begin with, I find Kim a very fun and gutsy character. She may have become a practical, down-to-earth mother since retiring from the music scene, but that doesn't stop her inner rebel teenager from shining through. With her blue-tipped highlights, grungy clothes, and take-no-crap attitude, you could say that times changed her from pop to punk. But this outward self-confidence hides a deep personal wound that threatens to reopen as she tries to readjust to life in her hometown. In a horror movie featuring hideously misshapen beasts, Kim is a fascinating example of how one doesn't always have to look like a monster to be treated like one. It's revealed early on that, at the height of her popularity, Kim had arrogantly slandered Duluth and its people, a mistake she has regretted ever since. It is out of genuine concern that she tries to warn her fellow Duluthians of the danger they are in, but to her shame and dismay she discovers many of them still carry a grudge, one they aren't afraid to rub in her face and that she fears could follow and define her the rest of her life. The way I see Ojala's portrayal, the detrimental judgments afflicted on those going against the so-called norm through no fault of their own, whether due to a birth defect or a single but incalculable mistake, aren't very different from abusive comments made by racists. Anyone deemed other by the majority can be, and sadly is, subject to ridicule, violence, and so much worse. What we fail to realize all too often is, because so very few take the time to listen and learn and empathize, it is not only the judged who ultimately risk meeting a terrible end. Movies about animals mutating into monstrous abominations because of human carelessness toward Mother Nature are a dime a dozen, as are those about outcasts in turmoil struggling to find their true place in the world. It's really refreshing to see a movie not only blend the two tropes together seamlessly, but do so in such an exciting, meaningful, and significant manner, particularly in a real-life town little known and seldom highlighted in the medium of cinema. With excellent social commentary on pollution and the fragile relationship between humans and both nature and each other, Strange Nature is a unique indie horror film that gives the term lake effect a whole new twisted meaning. Gather around next time for another tale you may have forgotten or have never heard before. Until then, listeners, may inspiration always find you.